Welcome to the ProfitLed podcast, where we discover proven growth strategies for bootstrapped entrepreneurs from the people who have done it before to help you accelerate your business. The ProfitLed podcast is brought to you by eWebinar, the leading automated webinar platform, which could save you from doing the same webinar over and over again. From sales demos to onboarding to training, eWebinar turns any video into an interactive webinar that you can set on a recurring schedule or make available on demand, which means you can do hundreds of webinars without ever needing to actually be there to host them live. This podcast is a forum for the unsung heroes of SaaS, the founders and others behind bootstrapped startups who are creative and resourceful enough to forge a pathway to success. Here is where they get to share everything they learned along the way, so you can benefit from their experience and find success in your own ventures too.
Welcome to ProfitLed Season 2, the podcast where we talk about our journey to $1 million at eWebinar, bootstrapping the company from day one. Our goal is to give you a window into what it's like to build a company with very little resources. Each episode goes in depth into one major aspect of our journey. We share war stories, mistakes, and lessons learned as we grew the company to $1 million in annual recurring revenue over 36 months. My name is Melissa Kwan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of eWebinar and your host. I'm here with my co-host, Todd Parmley, eWebinar's COO. Hey, Todd, how's it going?
It's going good. I'm happy to be here, ready to do another episode.
Well, in the last episode, we talked about how to put together a founding team with limited resources, something that all bootstrap founders should probably know how to do. We shared what our founding team looked like, why I chose to only work with contractors, and how to convince people to join our team when we didn't even have a product yet. So today on episode 5, I thought we could dive deeper into one particular aspect of putting together a founding team, which is recruiting a top 1% CTO co-founder. How do you find a great CTO is a question that I get a lot. And I agree, it's super hard, especially to find one who's a genius at coding, loves what you're doing, and willing to jump in full-time with you. I need to throw out a disclaimer here. David, my CTO co-founder, is also my life partner. I talked about how that happened in the last episode. It didn't start that way, but it ended that way with David joining me a year into this venture. So I don't want to sound biased by saying he's a top 1% coder just because he's my life partner, but David is a wizard and I'm constantly in awe of what he's able to build. Software that just works and works at scale. He's the reason we have weekends and evenings. I never thought a SaaS product could have so few bugs. I lived the opposite of that for 10 years with my last 2 startups, where we were constantly putting out fires and managing customer expectations with things breaking here and there. So Todd, maybe I'll let you give our audience some context as to the kind of engineer that David is. So I'm not the only one tooting his horn. And just to be clear, this isn't an episode where we're just singing his praises. But I do think that it's important before we start this conversation to give some context to the caliber of CTO he is, because finding someone who can code is actually not that hard, but finding someone who can really code, someone who can build a product to scale that doesn't break, that is hard. And today's episode is about the mindset of that person, how to recruit them and bring them onto your team.
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, I have a disclaimer. David is not my life partner, so I don't have the same bias that you do. I mean, so I often tell people David's the most talented engineer I've ever worked with. I've been in tech for 20 plus years. I've worked with a lot of talented engineers, but David is unique. And I think that David's unique because, so I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but when we were first building the product with the dev team, the contracted dev team, we were having problems, right? And David came in and started assessing the situation. The second I heard him start talking about the problems, I knew we were in good hands because I had been in with engineers long enough to understand conceptually the problems that they were solving, how they approached solving them. And so that was my first sort of instinct, at least, that I was like, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. But over time, I mean, the reality is he builds things that don't break and that are scalable. Like he has the unique, a lot of coders are really good at building the individual pieces. And then there's engineers who are really good at designing systems. So you've got people who sort of understand the bird's eye view and understand the ground. And he understands everything top to bottom, everything between. And he's thinking about the implications of what he does from top to bottom all the time. And also as a product person, even the front end, he's looking to sort of componentize it, if that is a word, so that we can, reuse features, at least the back end of features. And he has taught me how to think about product in a different way because of that. So yeah, I mean, he's super rare. He's a little bit of a unicorn, I have to say.
I mean, what's crazy is he's never done it before either.
Yeah.
And if I think about our founding team, I've never built a product-led growth company, like a self-serve SaaS. You haven't done 90% of the things that you're doing.
Yeah, right.
David, and we're going to get into his experience, but he has never built a product of this size either.
Yeah.
So it's not he built it before and he's doing it again. He tried building things before, didn't really take off, but a product of this size, designing something of this caliber is all new as well. So that's some, I guess, more backstory.
Yeah. And that's something also I see in David is that he solves problems. If he doesn't know how to solve a problem, he goes and learns how to solve the problem, because he's also had to do things that he's never done before, just in terms of approaches, certain technologies. It's all new to him. So it's impressive.
Yeah. And I know it seems like we should have him here to talk about himself and his own experience, but he's not a public speaker and he prefers to stay behind the scenes. So I actually interviewed him before planning this episode, and I ended up learning a lot of things that I was hesitant to ask him before, because he is my life partner. So it was actually cool to be able to use his podcast as an excuse to ask him things I always wanted to know, like where his head was at when he started helping out on eWebinar and then, eventually becoming my co-founder.
Yeah. Well, then why don't we start with the backstory then? What is David's experience? What was he doing before joining eWebinar? What's kind of the scope of his background?
So he spent 16 years at Microsoft before going to the startup world. And he's managed teams of a couple hundred people. And, at that point, he worked for Microsoft, basically out of college. He was in Seattle for many years and then eventually got transferred to Paris, where he was living when he quit the company. I think Microsoft had bought a music company. I forgot what it was called, but he was part of the team to go to Paris to run that. And he's originally from Europe. So that was kind of going home. And he quit Microsoft just before I met him to join two guys in New York as their third CTO co-founder for a telecom startup. So it was it was one guy from American Express and another guy who was a corporate lawyer, and they were missing a tech co-founder. And so, yeah, that was around the time that we met in New York, and this company raised $10 million in total for VCs. They ran it for about 4 years, but it didn't work out the way that they had hoped. And after that, David consulted as a fractional CTO for a few startups, but he never got into anything very seriously until eWebinar, which was, I think, at least 2 years after the last startup didn't work. So he just kind of floated around for a couple of years. I mean, I'd say the reason why he's so good at what he does is because he spent so many years at Microsoft really working with the best of the best and managing small and big teams, over the course of his career. And, he started out of college. It was his dream job. He was one of those people that loved it so much that he slept in the office, and he worked his way up, and he finally quit, after 16 years because he didn't want to be in corporate anymore. He felt like the path to success within corporate was to be more political.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And that just wasn't the game that he wanted to play. That wasn't who he was. And he always wanted to be in startups and wanted to have more impact rather than be a gear in the machine. And that opportunity in New York came up to join these two founders. And, it came through a friend. And then he actually just spent those 4 years in New York building a much smaller team, working on a brand new product, for the first time from the ground up. And I think when you're at a startup, you're kind of living dog years. And I think you learn more when things are not going well. And in that startup, they struggled a lot to find the first product people would pay for. They pivoted a few times. It really wasn't easy. And I know it was super frustrating, especially as a CTO co-founder, where you're kind of in the back seat. You're not making those pivots. You're doing the thing that your CEO tells you to do, right? So I knew how frustrating that was. So I think that combination of experience really made him who he was when he started helping me out on eWebinar. And honestly, I think that I and we as a company just got super lucky on timing.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, that's the tale as old as time. Like the more you rise in a company, especially a large company, like it just becomes about politics. And especially if you love to do something, then you're just getting farther and farther away from it. And like you said, like being a gear in a machine is so much less interesting than having a bigger impact, which, by the way, was one of the reasons why I wanted to move into startups myself.
Yeah. I mean, anyone that knows David will know he's the least political person ever.
Right.
Like he will not go network or work a room. Like he's not going to be your friend if you don't get his humor or if you're offended by his humor. Like he's just not that guy. But, it paid really well, and he had a young family in Seattle, and then he got to travel in business class, and then he got to move to Paris on an expat package. So all these things were really nice, right? Until it just wasn't anymore, right? I think I know a lot of people around that age. I think he was around like 45 when I met him. I know a lot of people around that age, like pretty accomplished in their career, have done this so long, have a nice nest egg, and they can keep going. But at that point, they're like, well, is there something more interesting?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know we touched on this last time in the last episode about how David came to join the team, but do you want to talk a little bit about that more kind of in depth?
Yeah, just I guess as a reminder, if you didn't listen to the last episode. So when I started eWebinar, I thought that I could build it with a dev shop, like with no CTO. And originally I had hired a dev shop in Canada with the intention to move the development team to Vietnam where it would be cheaper, but I wanted the version 1 to be the highest quality possible. So I hired a friend's dev shop and thought that they could deliver the product that I had in mind. David was always going to be the advisor that oversees the things that we were building to make sure that they were built to spec, and then help bridge the Canadian team to the Vietnamese team. But, as dev shops go, we all underestimated the size of that project, and we were working with this dev shop for I want to say 9 months before David jumped in to help because nothing was actually working. And he was just helping out for free, volunteering his time, from a few hours a day to 16 hours a day. And, it was the beginning of 2020. We all know what happened there. And we weren't leaving the house. So all he was doing was helping me on this project. And then things started working magically. And I always tell people I don't code. I don't know how to read code, but I know bad software from good software because good software actually works and bad software doesn't. And it was only when the product started working that I realized, I had known this guy for over 5 years, and I didn't realize that he could code this well. Of course, I knew he could code, but not to this level. And that's when I knew I needed to end that relationship with the dev shop and pitch David as my technical co-founder. Because at that point, the dev shop was trying to deliver the project so they could get paid, but they didn't have the technical expertise to ever deliver the next milestone, but they were throwing so much resource at it. So then nobody was winning, right? I wasn't getting the product. They weren't getting paid. The product wasn't going to be, the product was getting worse, right? Because, as we were trying to fix it, it was getting worse. David wasn't getting paid because I was paying this other dev shop. So basically in that scenario, everybody was losing, and it just needed to come to an end.
So, I mean, did you talk about having David join you from the very beginning? I mean, was that a conversation? I mean, why didn't that happen? Why wasn't that the first thing you did?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I never thought he was a very good coder. I mean, the story is that when we met in New York, I mean, fun fact, he was my Airbnb guest. That's how we met.
Oh my God.
I mean, it wasn't through the platform Airbnb, but I started this co-living house in New York, Gramercy House, this 5-bedroom, 2-level townhouse. And, it was the co-living space of that era. And the whole premise of it was you can't list the house on Airbnb, but we can sublet it to friends that we know in our circle. Like that house was $12,000 a month to rent.
Yeah.
So all of us were like paying 80 to 90% of what we were making every month just to make rent. But it was like in the middle of Manhattan, and we were the event space for a while, right? Like, and we threw like, that's where the famous Zilla dinner was, and we had like brunches, like there was like events every day, and that was how I met all my friends in New York. So David was actually the first guy that rented my roommate's room when she was traveling. And he shared a co-working space with one of her friends, right? So, and back then he was still traveling between Paris and New York to start this company. So he was like staying in different Airbnbs, and he wanted a place that he could leave some stuff in, right? So that's how we met. And I was struggling with my own startup at the time. And I'd written about, my darkest moment. Like the initial 2 years that I started living in New York were really my worst 2 years of my entire career. Like I couldn't find a product market fit. I was trying super hard and I never had any money. Like for 2 years, I had, $100 in my account because I was afraid to put money in my account in case we didn't have enough to pay our bills at the end of the month. So there he is. This guy moves into my house and, he's 12 years older than me. They've raised a bunch of money. And he has money and he just wants to go out all the time. And he loves going out and trying restaurants and he loves food and partying. So there's this guy that's like giving me a staycation that I haven't had. Right. And so all these years, I'm like, why do you have so much time to have fun with me? He's always there to have fun with me. But you're like a CTO of this startup. And he's like, oh, I'm just efficient. And even after that company didn't work out and he was like, fractional CTOing for other companies. Like they pay him a lot of money and he worked like a few hours here and a few hours there. So I always thought that he was just this guy who loved to have fun, who was lazy. So, but because I was, because I was like benefiting from that lifestyle, I wasn't going to stop him and make him work more. I liked the fact that he wasn't working very much. Right. So, I wasn't going to question that. So because of that, it didn't even cross my mind that it would be an option because I don't want a lazy CTO on my side. And also like I've just heard so many horror stories about working with your life partner and how terrible that could be. Right. And I just didn't think it was going to work. So in my mind, a dev shop would have been the same as a CTO. And that's after 10 years and 2 startups. So that's how little I know about technology. Right? Like I thought a dev shop after 10 years of working with CTO that a dev shop could just be my CTO. And, at that point I was just so sick of not knowing how to manage engineers because that's what happened in my last 2 startups that I just wanted that pain to go away. Right. And as for David, I asked him why he didn't pitch me to be my co-founder. Because he saw me start this business. He watched me like hire this dev shop. And in theory, he should have known that it wasn't going to work. And so like he said that he thought it would eventually happen anyway. And at the time I had my mindset on hiring a dev shop and he wasn't going to stop me. Right. And that's probably true. Like if I had my mindset on something and I think it's going to work until I see it fail. But honestly, like I think it was also too premature of an idea. Like he had worked with a few very early startups as a fractional CTO, and sometimes they would pay him. Most of the time they couldn't. And he was so jaded from founders saying they were going to do something, like do this and that I just don't think he would have jumped into it with me had I pitched him, at the time. And if we did go into it together and this didn't work out, and like I didn't see this through, it would have ruined our relationship. Like I don't think our relationship would have survived it.
Yeah. I mean, just to comment on one thing you said early in what you're saying is David saying he works efficiently? Like you have no idea how deep that statement is.
Yeah. Yeah. Like we can't even communicate. Like emojis can't communicate this. Right? Yes,
exactly. I love how like I would have the same reaction too. I would think the guy was lazy, right? I think he was just like riding the gravy train, but
I mean, sometimes people look at our product and they're like, how big is your team? They're like, how are you paying for all these people? Like, how is this product like Like every time we send out a product update, like Andrew from Real Scout will always reply and he'll be like, how are you doing this?
Yeah, right. Yeah, our product is very large. It doesn't appear to be, but it's incredibly large and complicated.
Yeah, it's deep. Like
it's deep.
It does a lot.
Yeah.
But I mean, we've just made it so beautifully simple.
Yeah.
Not simply
the
beautiful,
experience
right?
of it.
Like it's just it just works. We're constantly questioning our own experience and how people are thinking about it. And maybe the product got too big and maybe we should visually make it smaller, but not take away the features. Like this is really him, but also you, but really him figuring out, okay, what does it look like on the back end?
Yes. Right. Yeah. So I'm curious about the New York startup that he quit Microsoft for. What was that opportunity like that got him to finally quit his job and get into startups?
Yeah. So I guess that brings that back kind of around to today's topic is like, how do you get a CTO to quit his job and join you? Like one of these CTOs, right? I mean, I think it was just one of those like super typical, like funded startup stories. We're talking like, I want to say this is something like 2017. Like this was like the height of every startup raising money. And these two business founders had successes in their corporate careers. They were both older. I think either his age or older, right, at the time. So they were successful for what they were doing. And they needed a seasoned CTO, and a friend who, was a VC, from San Francisco. An old friend from Microsoft contacted him and said, hey, like, are you interested in this opportunity? And, it was just like three guys with a lot of experience under their belt, and they ended up getting $10 million in funding, which ironically at the time, because David came from Microsoft, he thought that was very little. Right. He was like, well, 10 million, like what's that going to be?
What can I do with that?
Yeah, exactly. So he just had no concept of what even to look for in a startup. So I think the timing of that opportunity for him it just happened so beautifully because he really wanted to quit. He was waiting for something, but he wasn't going to give up this golden goose, because he had all those benefits that I just talked about. It's like he wasn't going to give that up and go find a startup. He's not like a type A like salesperson. He's not going to go like pitch other founders, right? So he was just kind of waiting for that opportunity. And, from what he knew from corporate, it seemed like that was a winning team with
right. Oh yeah, sure.
some funding behind it. Like there was nothing that raised red flags, like, because he just didn't know what to look for. So winning team, some funding, he was getting a fair split of equity, right? So it was like three founders split, 1/3 each, of course, minus the dilution that they were going to have from raising money.
Right.
And like he took a 75% pay cut, but it was an opportunity to move to New York, where he always wanted to live. And I guess what he didn't know at the time was how having only corporate experience and successes would actually hinder a startup and not help it.
Yeah.
So he didn't know he didn't know that was a red flag. I would have known, right? Like you probably would have known, but he didn't know. Right. So I know he was super disappointed when it didn't work out, and he beat himself up over how much time was, I guess, quote unquote, wasted with that company. But I think a CTO navigating different startup opportunities is no different than a CEO navigating market opportunities. Right? You need to go through a few of these things to learn what's good and bad, what to look for. But I think the lesson here is that it's not always about money, right? Especially when it comes to seasoned, accomplished professionals, right? Like he took a 75% pay cut, right? Because what was most important to him at the time was getting to leave his job, like that, number one, and getting to move to New York, like this dream city that he never got to live in his 20s.
Yeah.
Right. So these lifestyle upgrades at that time for him was actually worth the 75% pay cut, because the 1/3 equity that he was getting, in theory, could have been a big payout at some point in the future, right? That was the dream.
Yeah. And kind of the person who fits that mold generally is going to be someone who's a seasoned, experienced person who has had a career, has some establishment, and is not interested in looking for more money.
Yeah.
They're interested in a different experience. And, I had my own experience vetting startups, very different lessons, very different circumstances. And I too was kind of beating myself up about these bad experiences I had, but it wouldn't have given me the foresight or the ability to recognize a good opportunity when it came my way. So, it's just, you learn by doing and failing, frankly.
And I think it's not like, oh, seasoned professionals don't want money. It's that they can wait longer. Like their personal runway is longer. So they're willing to take a step back for a bit in order to like eventually find that home run. Yeah,
for sure. So what was David's experience learning to vet startups? Did you talk to him about that? What do you think he got from it?
Yeah, that was like, that was one of the questions that, I guess, interview questions I had when I was like prepping for this conversation. I mean, I think the one thing that he learned was that funding does not equal success. And that's something that, as an avid bootstrapper, I write about this a few times a day, like a few times a week on LinkedIn, right? Like,
yeah.
But when you don't know what you don't know, and people that follow me, I know, like I believe the media really skews our idea of what success is, because that's all we read about. We think that someone gives you money or a brand name gives you money, and it's a permission to succeed. It's like a license to succeed, but it really means nothing more than someone giving you money, right? So he said in the beginning, he thought that getting VC money meant someone else is betting on you to succeed, and that meant you have a higher chance of success. But that's normal, right? This mindset is normal.
Right.
But after that whole experience, he realized it's not that black and white. And don't forget, like while he was building that VC funded company, I was also starting to get my bootstrap company off the ground. So he got to see the other side of the coin through my eyes.
Yeah.
Right. So in their situation, in the end, VC stopped funding them. Like they ran out of money, so they couldn't keep going. Like not because they didn't think the product they were building couldn't eventually be viable. Like they pivoted a few times and, and as every startup does, right? Like you're trying to find that thing that like people eventually pay for.
Yeah.
And VCs didn't stop funding them because they didn't think they could eventually figure it out. They stopped funding them because the cap table was not viable.
Right.
So he said that he went for the all or nothing.
Right.
But he got nothing.
Yeah, right.
So after that, the thing he thinks about is, how can I not end up with nothing? That was what he learned. Like that was really top of mind. So that changed his perspective on business opportunities as a whole. And so I think this is important for founders who are seeking CTO co-founders to know that CTOs have very little control over the business idea and direction. So, I mean, if any.
Yeah, right.
So they're putting their trust and future in you, the CEO.
Yeah.
So how are you going to sell them on the idea that they're going to make it big? So they're putting their trust and future in you, right? The CEO. So how are you going to sell them that they're either going to make it big or not end up with nothing, right? It's a big responsibility to carry. Yeah. But on the other side, like on the CTO side, it's a huge life decision for that other person, right? So that's why when I hear things like, I'm going to offer X% for this person to join me, my first thought is, well, and what else are you going to offer? Right? Because 99% of a $0 company is still $0.
Yep.
Right? So you can't use equity, which is future money that has a high chance of being zero, to attract top talent. Right? You need to think about what the other person wants today. Right? Maybe that's a lifestyle need. Right? And also, what do they want in the future?
So I'm assuming that's why he didn't like jump into anything else after that startup. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, he kind of had totally had PTSD from, I would.
I can relate.
I mean, there was a lot going on. I think at the time it was 2 years, maybe a bit over that, of floating around and helping startups here and there.
Yeah.
The thing is, CTOs are not salespeople. So he wasn't going out and finding new opportunities, right? They would just come to him because he was so senior and he just knew a lot of people through his network. Mm-hmm. But the problem was he was just taking whatever came his way, right? And those weren't always the best projects. In fact, those are never really the best projects, right?
Right.
So I remember teaching him to reach out to friends on LinkedIn or go to networking events or reach out to VCs to find better opportunities, like more interesting opportunities, to keep him interested, because he was just doing these things that were just small projects, or they were just kind of lame.
Yeah.
And he just didn't do it. Like, he didn't know how to do it. And
Yeah.
I think that's good news for founders who know a CTO like that, because you could just recruit him, right? But it's bad news for CTOs looking for the next best thing, right? The startups he worked with weren't great because he didn't actually he didn't choose them. They chose him. And a lot of business founders say they would do things that they didn't do, and a lot of people ran out of money or never had it, right?
Yeah.
Or never raised a round that they wanted to. And he thought that at the time, as a fractional CTO, that he could get some equity here and there, like a little bit here and there, and get a front row seat to the next big thing without putting all his eggs in one basket like he did, previously.
Yeah. Right.
And so he ended up seeing a lot of bad ideas. But at some point, right, like, he worked 4 years for the startup that didn't work out, floated around for, 2.5 years. And at some point he was like, I just need to get paid, right?
Yeah, right.
He was tired of not making money.
Yeah.
So he was just doing these small jobs, but also, like, from the sidelines, I think he was just tired of not feeling success.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And that's an exhausting thing, right?
Yes, it is.
Put so much effort and, like, no one's using something, right?
Yeah.
I have this theory that, like, developers are like artists.
Yeah.
Right. And I lived through that at my last startup when it took 2.5 years to find product market fit, where my co-founder, like, I could feel and I could see the exhaustion from pivoting so many times. So it, like, just not being, like, I guess, like, not feeling like you're making impact, I think, was getting to him.
Yeah.
And I guess another reason why he didn't commit to one thing was because we were already nomading, right? So we left New York to nomad full time for 3 years.
Right.
So he had already experienced this complete freedom over his time. And he couldn't see himself being tied to one location anymore.
Yeah.
And like, as a CTO, you have to be, right? Even if the rest of the company gets, to be remote, as a CTO, you probably have to be in one location unless it's a remote company. But that was pre-2020, right? So being remote wasn't a popular concept yet. He didn't want to give up that lifestyle, which was a huge reason why he stayed a consultant. And I think that's a really good thing for listeners to know, is when you pitch an experienced CTO co-founder, that person has seen a lot of shit.
Right.
And is actually going to assume that the thing you're pitching them is also shit. So how are you going to make them feel differently about your project?
Yeah, right.
Like, that's the thing you have to solve, right? If this person has already seen 100 things, right, how am I going to make them feel like my thing is different?
God, how true that is. If you're a seasoned professional, you've seen a lot of shit.
Well, could you imagine, like, you go to every meetup and everyone's like, oh Todd, like, I've got this great idea.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And you're, like, rolling your eyes like, oh, here it goes. I do that now. Right? Like, I'm not even a CTO. People aren't running to me to tell me about their ideas.
Well, then, you pitched David, obviously, right? So what was that like? When you finally realized, oh, this might be the guy, my life partner.
He was right here.
All
I'm
along.
like, where? God's like, I put him right here.
Yeah, exactly. It's
but
like,
why did you make him lazy? Hey, I'd like to take a second here to talk about my own company, eWebinar, and our mission to rescue people from what I call webinar hell, to give them back their time and save them literally hundreds of hours every month through webinar automation. If your sales team is tired of doing the same demo over and over for unqualified leads, or worse, prospects who don't even show up, an on-demand demo powered by eWebinar can help them get their time back so they can close more deals. If you're doing customer onboarding and training on repeat, eWebinar can help you automate those so you never have to do them live again. Customer success teams are using eWebinar to run hundreds of sessions every single month without a live host. Why don't you give our product a try and see for yourself? Visit ewebinar.com to join our own on-demand demo or to sign up for a free trial. All right, now that I've gotten that on my system, let's get back to the episode. I mean, at the time, he was already helping with eWebinar as a contractor for a few months and proving he could do better than a dev shop that I hired for our version 1.
Right.
And, I've said this before in the previous episode, like, I believe all co-founder relationships and all significant relationships in a business should start as contractors. So you can get to know each other.
Yeah, for sure.
And how you both work before you start, splitting your house. Right. So it just got to a point where it didn't make sense, as I had mentioned, to be spending money on a dev shop when that obviously wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
And so I went to David and I asked him how he would feel about joining me as my co-founder if I ended that relationship with a Canadian dev shop, and hired a team from Vietnam right away that he could manage. And at the time, I already knew he loved the product and our mission. Right. And the other reason I believe so much in working with a person before bringing them on in a bigger capacity is because you can't fake passion.
Yeah.
Right. In an interview, you can fake anything.
Yeah.
But once you start working with someone, you can tell when they're in love with this project.
Yeah.
Right. They want to be a part of it. They're excited. It's like this childlike energy. They're always thinking about it. They want to see this thing come to life. They're contributing ideas. They're working on it without being asked. Right. That passion doesn't happen right away.
Yep.
Right. Like it very rarely does it happen right away. And in David's case, I saw it grow like over the few months as we were trapped in our house. So as the story goes, like I asked him how he would feel.
Yeah.
And he said yes. And that's how it started. But it was a year into that relationship it was a year into working on eWebinar already.
Yeah. I mean, I think you kind of already answered this question, but why did he jump into eWebinar having had such a bad experience with other startups? I mean, I imagine part of it is he having seen so much you can kind of be like, oh, this is not right. This is the opposite.
I mean, I guess I never asked him if he thought it could be, because it was still pre-launch, right? Like there was no indication that it was going to work or not, right? It was still pretty early on. I did ask him, why he jumped into this one particularly. And he said, first, he's a sucker for a good story. And I was good at telling the story of why eWebinar was needed and wanted. And you had mentioned in an earlier episode that one of the most important things you look for to join a startup is a founder who knows how to sell, because you worked with startups where founders had no idea how to sell.
No clue.
So that was his version of that. But the main reason was because he started to see the product come to life.
Yeah.
And he had said like so many founder conversations he had just didn't turn into anything. So it was becoming more real. Like as it was becoming more real, his own interest grew.
Right.
And he knew that it was so hard to get into a ground floor startup. And this opportunity was literally right there. Like it couldn't be closer.
Literally.
And like I didn't ask if he thought about our personal relationship and if that played a part.
Yeah.
But we ever really only approached this topic as like partners in business. Like I like to think that we were both pretty adult about it.
Yeah.
Another important factor was I designed eWebinar to be a bootstrap lifestyle startup. And at the time, he was so done with VCs. And like he didn't want the all or nothing anymore. He wanted all or something.
Right.
And like I said, like I think we just got super lucky with timing. Like had I been the first person that approached him after Microsoft, he would have turned me down because we weren't going to raise venture capital.
Yeah. Right.
And like, never forget how important value alignment is with a potential co-founder.
Right.
Right. Like if two people love the idea, but if you two are at different places in your life, it's just never going to work. Right. If one person wants to hustle 7 days a week and the other just wants to cruise in a lifestyle business, like it's going to be a pretty tough partnership. So like it's like, don't be the first girl this guy dates right after he gets a divorce.
Right. Don't be the rebound.
So like we weren't that person. Actually, funny side story. He moved to New York because he was ending like a 15-year marriage. And when he moved to New York, he was like, I'm finally getting to live in this city. I'm going to go crazy, party every day. I'm going to meet tons of girls. I was the first girl he met.
And he's oh my God, that's hysterical.
So don't be the first girly dates, be the first girly dates. Sometimes it just works out.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Right. Okay. So he comes on, well, he says yes, right? I assume he says yes, right? And then how did you guys navigate the equity split?
I mean, that's always an awkward conversation, right?
Yeah.
Like, and when I hear like life partners working together
Yeah.
and not having contracts in place as if you're not married, not together,
Yeah.
like not having everything documented, that just makes me cringe. Like,
Yeah.
once something has value, like once money's involved, you need to be super clear what those exit terms are, right? And once those things are aside, like I'm a believer in prenups, right?
Yeah.
Like I think they're more romantic because it removes the uncertainty and potential anger from those conversations, right? So once that's aside, you can actually focus on your relationship.
Yeah.
So I think with anything with money, with partners, it's weird, but I think I another thing I lucked out with was he saw me build my previous company with my co-founder, who I had a lot of challenges with.
Yeah.
And he also saw how much I was able to sacrifice for my previous business and how far I took it. So he saw the many things that I did. So he knew what I was going to do for eWebinar. There was no question.
Right.
That I was going to do the same or more.
Right.
So I think when you talk about equity split, there's always this like, well, should it be 50-50? Like, are you going to do as much as me or am I going to do as much as you? Or like, there's a trust, I think, that's lacking, right? When it comes to those conversations, and you don't like, nobody wants to feel like they got the shorter end of the stick. Right. So
no.
Of the co-founder conflicts that I know about, a lot of them actually come from that, right? Like after a few years of working together, realizing, hey, I'm doing so much more, but we split the company. So why should I do this, right? But then the other person doesn't feel that way. So that's always been my point of view, is like the way you split a company should be relative to your contribution.
Yeah.
So lay out every single responsibility that you're going to be accountable for. Both people should do that. And then go over that list and then determine what percentage split is fair based on the entire list, right? Because a company is not, sales and product, right? A company is marketing, right? It's sales, it's vision, it's recruiting, it's retention, right? Like sometimes it's conferences, right? Like who's going to do all those things, right? So, or it's funding,
right?
It's who's going to raise the money, who's going to put in the money, right? So, because we already had a history of like kind of watching each other from the sideline, that made that conversation more easy. But I think the best way to have any awkward conversation is just to be super honest. So I had the conversation with him exactly as I'm having with you now. Is like, okay, I had this previous experience. I know these are the things I'm going to do for the business. I believe that these are the things you're going to do for the business. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Based on these things, what is an equity split that you believe you need to feel fully invested in the business and not feel like you have the short end of the stick, but also understanding that we are now 1 year into the business. And I'm going to build the business side while you code the product. So he came up with a number, we agreed on it, and we papered it just like two co-founders would. There's a 4-year vesting, 1 year cliff, just like anything else. Like everything is as if it's a funded startup. Right. So I wanted to do things that way in case in the future we do raise money, everything's documented. And then we never talked about it again. Right. So I think when you start off having a very honest conversation about where you are, what you're going to contribute, and what you believe is fair, you get that conversation out of the way, like for the rest of your startup.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of frank, direct conversation like that, where you kind of are completely transparent, is important generally. But I just want to echo that, like, if you're working with your life partner, like that's even more important, is to have that kind of separation and say, this is a business conversation. I mean, all the friends of mine who work together like that, that's the ones that succeed do it that way. They just sort of like put the two things on two different tracks, and it's the only way to do it.
Yeah. And I've had friends that say, oh, we haven't done it yet, but it's okay. Like, we have an understanding. I'm like,
Oh my
what
God.
is the understanding?
Yeah.
Your
Oh my God.
understanding might be different than his understanding, but now you're in too deep, right?
Yeah.
You're going to have that conversation from day one.
Yeah.
So we had that conversation, and I played it out in my head a bit, but the moment I asked him to be my co-founder and he agreed, that's when I had that conversation.
Yeah,
I didn't wait
right.
till he put more work into it. It was like, okay, like now let's talk about the numbers, and then now let's get our lawyer to draft this up. And actually, I forgot about this because the company already had value.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so we already had IP. We're incorporated in Canada. So you can't just give someone equity, right? Like you can, but if you get challenged by like, the IRS or CRA or whatever, like whatever jurisdiction you're in, you could be liable for taxes, right? So the only way we could do that was if I gifted him those shares, he would have to pay tax on that as if it's a gift, right?
Yeah.
So the way that I did it was I had a third party company value our company, because that's the only way you could get a value, but it was so early that the value was very low.
Yeah.
So I had a third party value company, so we had that papered, but we documented it as if I sold it to him.
Yeah.
So actually I paid tax on the proceeds.
Right.
If that makes sense. So I didn't need him to like pay me for it.
Right. Well, so then you have this initial negotiation, and then you start working together. There still had to be a period where there was like a transition, right? From the sort of personal to professional, or what was that like?
Yeah. So I remember the beginning was super weird.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you're
right?
transitioning from.
Yeah, it had to have been.
I think the hardest thing to figure out is how do you now communicate with a person that you communicate to every day, like your family.
Yeah.
Like when you communicate with your partner, like you're just saying things as they come to you, right? Like there's no filter.
Right.
But think about like talking to your colleagues or your boss or your team, like you're filtering them, right? You're thinking about their feelings, right? You have more empathy. Whereas you've already developed a way to talk to your life partner.
Yeah, right.
And that does not translate into work, especially because we had to get to know each other's work personality.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, for sure.
I'm pretty easygoing, like pretty chill as a friend.
Yeah.
But in work, like I've got a certain way that I like to work.
Yeah.
And things need to get delivered. They need to get delivered on time. Like,
yeah,
I'm pretty OCD about all those things.
Yeah.
And I'm also quite like curt, right? I'm also quite short when I'm like, I need to ask for something. I'm like, just give it to me.
Right.
But I'm never like I'm never ill-intended, right?
Yeah. Right.
But here's this person you live with for 5 years, and now you're like shouting things at him. Like that's the perception.
Yeah. Right.
Right. Well, when is this thing coming? When's this feature? Where are you right now? Like there's just a tone that needed to be adjusted.
Yeah.
So it was super weird, but that also happened the other way.
Yeah.
Right. Because also I could easily change my personality, right? Like if I think this thing is not serving me, I'll just change it.
Yeah.
I don't take emotions into work, right? Like vice versa. Like I can be, CEO for 10 hours. And then if we're going to go watch a movie, I'd be like, oh yeah, let's go watch a movie.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
And I will drop every single debate, like, every disagreement we had, and I'll just go watch a movie and have fun. Right.
Yeah.
I'm like an on-off switch.
Yeah.
He is not that person. Like he's much more emotional. He's much more in tune with his feelings. Like he's much more expressive than me. Right. So I remember in the beginning, he was like, we just had this hour-long debate about this thing that we didn't agree with. Like, how am I just going to move over to this restaurant and have dinner now? Yeah. I'm like, well, what do you mean? Like, so I just also couldn't.
Oh my God, that's so funny.
Yeah, I just couldn't understand that either. So I think it probably took like a good year before we really figured out like how to ignore each other in those states. And how to give each other the benefit of the doubt that like we're both just trying to get to the same goal. Right.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I think he's also just better at ignoring me. Like, and I mean, he is 12 years older, so he's much more patient. But yeah, it like in the beginning, it was just like, it was super hard to adjust to like new ways of communication.
Yeah. It's funny. It reminds me of when I moved to New York. I grew up in like hippy dippy Northern California, and then you come to the business world in New York, and everybody's just so direct and so like, I had to have my own adjustment in terms of how to not take any of that personally, because it's not personal.
Yeah, I mean, I think in New York, like people think, like I love New York because people just tell you the truth.
Yeah, right.
Right. People think that New Yorkers are rude, but like
are rude. Yeah.
They're super friendly. They're just treating you as their next door neighbor.
Yeah.
And if you're like, hey, how are you? They're not going to fake like having a good day. They're going to tell you exactly how their day is. Like, I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, it's like when you ask someone for directions in New York, and I love watching this with tourists, is that they'll tell you exactly exactly where to go.
Yeah.
And then they'll walk away. And
well, because they're in a hurry.
They're in a hurry. Like, they have things to do, but they're going to stop and help you. Like, so it's like they get this like reputation for being rude, but they're actually helpful. So anyway, that's a little bit of a diversion from the conversation.
Yeah, it's basically the same thing.
Yeah, no, that's what I was thinking. It is the same thing. So, I mean, I'm curious because I don't have a technology background either, right? So I grew into a role of product manager over the years, working in tech. So, and I know you had a tough time with your previous co-founder, right? Because you didn't have sort of the ability to manage the team, the engineering team. That was hard. And I know that that's kind of trickled down into the delivery of things. And, you were promising things to customers and trying to manage timelines. And there was like a disconnect between you and your CTO. So then what was it like to work with a CTO who was more senior, who was kind of better at doing those things?
Yeah. So I always thought that I was a bad manager of engineers because I don't know how to code or a bad, I always thought that it was my fault, I guess, that, my co-founder and I never resolved these conflicts, and then I never fully understood his job. But it wasn't until working with David that I realized I don't actually need to manage an engineer if he's just really good. Right. So I needed to manage, my co-founder because he wasn't as good. And frankly, it wasn't really his fault because he started working with me right out of university.
Yeah.
So he didn't have work experience. He didn't have systems. He didn't learn from mentors. Like, he was really good at doing the thing that he was doing, but it was capped, I guess, right? You can only be as good as your experience.
Yeah.
So it was only until I met David that I realized, that's actually not my job. Right. Like, and it was such a relief to work with someone who fully understands that when you're responsible for a product, you're delivering. And as the tech leader, you are setting, you are creating the system for people to follow, right? You are adhering to your own deadlines, right? You are telling people what to do and how to have visibility. I remember the first thing he did was sign up for Monday. Like, he looked for the most simple thing. Yeah. So we didn't need multiple things. Like, he only wanted one thing because he wanted to not just save money, but he wanted people to adopt things. So he chose Monday, and we still use it to date. There's no Jira or anything like that. Yeah. And he just used spreadsheet style way of managing all the processes. Yep. And, and he trained every single person. It was like, everything goes through an assembly line and everything's super clear. Yeah. And so I actually can have visibility into exactly where we are, what we're working on if I wanted to. In my previous company, not only did I not have visibility, everything was in his head. Yeah. He didn't even have visibility.
God. Yeah. Right.
Right. He didn't even have a Trello board. I signed up for Trello, and then I started putting ideas in there. Like, it was crazy how we used to work. Right. So I thought that this time around, working with someone so senior was going to be even harder to manage, but like I've never had an easier time building a business because for the first time, I can actually focus on what I'm good at.
Yeah.
Which is what I wanted to do in the first place, which is why I hired the dev shop in the first place. I hired the dev shop so I could do everything business and not worry about anything product, which is what I do today. Like I worry about the big ideas as they relate to revenue, but I never tell them what to do. I can't even dream of it. I wouldn't even try.
Yeah,
right? Like, and it's so amazing to be in a company where things just happen.
Yeah.
And, you know, things just get shipped and they work and bugs happen and then he fixes them. And so I would highly recommend it. But at the end of the day, like, I think we just, as founders, I think we just have to work with who we have. Right. I think we're very lucky to have somebody like David, but like, it doesn't mean you can't build a company with someone who's not like that. You can. Right.
Yeah, for sure.
Like I did before, it's just a different experience.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's like for me, that has also been an amazing thing to watch is that how clear the process is. And I can also, you know, to have that kind of visibility where every item is sort of in the development life cycle. And also, you know, David's, you know, when you ask him every engineer hates it when you ask them to estimate a timeline, right? When will this be done? It's like the dreaded question. And David's really, you know, it is. Every engineer hates it. And he's really good at helping us understand that some things are not known until they're known, right? And so he can't size he doesn't know yet, right? But sometimes he's like, I know exactly how long this will take. And he's just really, he's also one of the most talented guys I've worked with in terms of estimation and meeting timelines because he has a really strong sense of the velocity of the team. Like he's really good at that. What's
really cool also is like, we'll talk about something like months ago. And
I know, right?
You know, and he never comes up again. And then I'm like, well, hey, what about this one thing? He's like, oh yeah, it's done. You know, it's being worked on for so long. And I'm like, really? Like it just, because in my past, I would bring something up, being like, hey, like, let's work on this thing. And if it never gets talked about, it never gets worked on.
It never gets
because
worked on.
It's nowhere.
Exactly, right.
Like it's not hiding anywhere. Like it's just in his brain and it just didn't get worked on.
Right. Yeah. So if something gets fed into the machine, it actually gets done.
That's a surprise.
Even if we're not like hounding, you know, because nobody loves to do that.
Well, and like 80% of the tickets we get are like user error. Like it's so rare.
Yeah, right.
It's so rare when there is a bug that when there is one, he's like, what? What are they talking about? I'm like, don't worry, this is the last one. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, so this is kind of a strange question because if this were to happen, it would have obviously much larger implications for you. So I think this is more general for like co-founders or for bootstrappers in general is, you know, if you manage to bring on a seasoned CTO, there's got to be people who are gunning for them, right? Who are trying to like recruit them. So I mean, that's what I mean. It probably has bigger implications if someone tried to take David away from you.
He can divorce me, but he can't leave the company.
Yeah, exactly. I do not want to be around if that happens. But like more in general, what do you do? How do you get someone to stay? So you get them, right? How do you get them to stay?
Yeah. I mean, I think the reality of the current situation is like, even if you're a mediocre CTO, like everybody wants you. Yeah. If you're open for work, people want you. Right. And I've seen that happen with my own friend startups. Right. And I mean, it's always a risk.
Yeah.
You know, companies have offered David equity to do things for them, right? While he was at eWebinar, you know, especially in the early stages, because, you know, everybody was consulting on the side to like kind of make up for income that we weren't able to pay. And, you know, if someone's like, hey, Todd, here's some free equity, you're going to take it. Right.
Yeah.
But I kind of saw that as a red flag because giving someone equity, especially a CTO equity, is the first step to getting them hooked.
Yep.
And then the second step is, hey, why don't you just come work for us?
Yeah, right? For sure.
I've had to shut those down, but I think these issues only arise when you're not doing well. Right. Or, you know, in the very beginning when there's no revenue, because revenue solves everything in business. right? And I've mentioned this before, like engineers are like artists. They want to see people admiring their work, right? In my last startup, when it took us so long to find our first customer, my co-founder was frustrated. He was bored, right?
Yeah.
But he had a strong sense of integrity and we had a strong friendship and I knew he wouldn't leave me, right?
Yeah.
But he did bring it up once that, maybe it's time for him to go and try something else.
Yeah.
And, we dealt with it at the time.
Yeah.
But coming back to my point about revenue and doing well, like if you want to keep your CTO interested,
Yeah.
you need to make sure that your product is being used by customers and generating revenue. Right? Because
that's such a revolutionary idea.
Yeah. I mean, when you see the business taking shape, they're
Right.
naturally going to want to stay.
Yeah, of course.
Right. And I don't think people think about that, right? Like,
Yeah.
of course, revenue solves hiring teams and marketing and all that, but revenue makes your CTO stay.
Yeah.
Right. Because this person has equity, right? Especially if they have significant equity. They're not going to jump ship to an established company where they have no equity, right? Or have to start fresh again with another startup.
Right.
They've just spent 3 years getting this off the ground, right? And I think the second most important thing is making sure your lifestyle values are aligned, right? As, in David's case, he wanted to quit his job and then he wanted to move to New York and he wanted his own freedom to travel full time. Like, I'm a believer that you need to know the life goals of everyone on your team so you know how to contribute in bigger ways than money, right? Especially as a bootstrap startup, when you can't pay them top dollar, like how are you going to make them stay, right? They have to know that when they're staying with you, you're taking them closer, I guess, to that life goal.
Yeah.
I think that's maybe more true, I think, with your co-founder and anyone who's like indispensable is like, how are you helping them achieve that goal while they spend time building your dream? Because it's not their dream, it's your dream.
Yeah, right.
And with David, like that ultimate dream has been complete freedom. And that was mine too, right? We just kind of aligned on that.
Yeah.
And the third thing I think you have to offer is you have to offer equal or more value as a partner, as a business partner. And I don't mean like equity value, right? They have to know that their life won't be better elsewhere. It's not going to be better at another startup with another co-founder. And value doesn't just come in economic value, right? Not just money. It comes in so many forms, right? Like you have to be the one to take them to that promised land. Like that's a given. But what you offer also comes in the form of respect, love, empathy, freedom, and how you create an environment for them and their team to thrive.
Yeah, for
right.
sure.
So what is that kind of complete package value, right? That you're going to offer them to make them feel like I'm not even going to think about talking to another startup.
Yeah,
like I know,
sure.
like I'm so secure in this position, and it's not because he's my life partner, right? It's because of where we are as a company, how much freedom he has, how little I dig into, like his work life and kind of micromanage him. Like it's truly his own company. Where I am building alongside, and because he trusts me as well, he mostly leaves me alone.
Yeah, and I feel the same way too. I think this has been a great conversation, right? I think we're getting kind of close to wrapping up. So, the whole premise of this episode has been, how do you recruit, top 1% co-founder CTO? So, for people who don't have one in their house, right, or already living with them, what is your advice for finding one? What would you suggest?
Have you heard of this platform called Airbnb?
No.
You should sign up to sublet your room.
Right. And
you're like, I'm subletting my 1-bedroom apartment, but I'm in it.
Great idea.
I would say like everyone knows someone, right? Even if not in your immediate circle.
Yeah.
If you're a business person, you've probably networked just kind of in your life. You probably know someone kind of in that profile.
Yeah.
And just reach out to your friends and start talking to people who are either already in jobs or newly quit their job, right? Like, because if the person you want is like a top 1% person, this person is working for someone else.
Yeah.
Right? Like, why would that person be actively looking for a job, right? Like that, if that person is 1%, everyone's going to want them.
Yeah.
So, and I tell people this all the time, like the person you want to recruit is currently working for someone else. So how are you going to find them?
Yeah.
Right. And I think you just got to talk to people who spent 20 plus years. Like if you want someone who's really, really good, right? 20 plus years, had experience managing teams, creating processes, right? People can be great engineers, like my previous co-founder, but not a good CTO because they just have never had experience working in a team.
For sure.
And that's going to make it really hard for you to build a team, because that's what's going to make you, business co-founder, have to manage an engineering team.
Yeah.
Because that guy's not going to do it.
No.
Right? Like, unless that person is someone who actively seeks mentorship, like that in scenario, it's still going to be hard, right? Because you're not learning through experience. So I would suggest like reach out to your network, talk to people that are 15, 20 years into their business or into their career, and maybe people that have like young families that are looking for like, what's the next thing? What's the next step? Like maybe people, I say people with young families because these are usually people that like lifestyle companies, want more freedom, don't want to go to a 9 to 5, right? Is sick of corporate, but they're stuck, and maybe they have some money that can, that they can stretch for a while. But I think this is the perfect profile to look for.
Yeah. Well, that's great. So I think, let me summarize what we talked about today. So we talked about David and, what it was like to pitch him as your co-founder. We talked about kind of the pros mostly, but pros and cons of working with someone senior, right? How to keep your CTO co-founder interested so that they stick around. And also, last but not least, how do you find a great CTO co-founder of your own when they are not living with you already? And so, with all that in mind, what is your hot take for this episode?
Yeah, my hot take is I come across a lot of business co-founders that think about equity first, right? How am I going to attract this person with equity? Like that's the first thing that they ask me is like, how much equity do you think I have to give this person for them to be my co-founder?
Yeah.
Like you have to offer more than equity. That is like my hottest take, right? Like lifestyle value alignment, I'd say is the most important factor, especially, in a bootstrap startup, because that is the core of your ethos. Yeah. Because life is something we do every single day. And equity is something that might cash out in the future. So don't underestimate just getting to know that person and where they want to be and what they want and the life they want to live right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Todd, what's your hot take for this episode?
Well, mine is a little bit of sort of a new, introducing a little bit of a new topic, but, I vetted my own startups and, one of the things that I learned is that you need a CTO who can set, like in terms of primary skill set, you need a CTO who can sell or a CEO who can sell and a CTO who builds software that doesn't break. Right. And then they also have to have a whole bunch of other things, but those need to be kind of their driving, like the driving characteristic that you look for. And you can't know that without working with them. You can't. Yeah. So like, I kind of jumped in to previous startups and I wish I had at least had the mindset set that I was vetting the experience first. Right. Because it would have probably made the transition much, much easier, right? If I'd gone in with that mindset. But my hot take is you need both. You need a CEO and a CTO that can do their jobs in terms of what their roles are, or it's not going to work. It's just not going to work.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many other skill sets that are required for a startup, but I think if you have a CEO who can sell and a CTO who can build a product that doesn't break, the two people can at least hack it together to get to some revenue and then use that revenue to hire more skill sets.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a good place to wrap up.
Yeah.
We talked about so many things about David today. I hope he feels very much appreciated.
Yeah.
I'm sure he's going to cringe when he listens to this
Yeah,
episode.
for sure.
Probably,
We should give it to him for his
can't
birthday.
listen to it. Yeah. So if there are particular topics that you want us to get into this season, please let me know by connecting with me on LinkedIn. Or if you have any feedback about this podcast, I'd love to hear from you. My name is Melissa Kwan, last name spelled Kwan. And if what we've talked about today resonates with you, subscribe to ProfitLed on your favorite podcast app to get notified of new episodes and join our mailing list by going to profitled.fm. I promise to only share things you'll actually care about. Thanks so much for listening. Bye now.
Thanks for listening to ProfitLed. If you enjoyed this episode, we hope you will subscribe to the ProfitLed podcast and head over to our website, profitled.fm, to see the show notes of every episode. You can also join our mailing list to be notified of new episodes or when we have interesting products and resources to share. We promise to only share things you'll actually care about. Thanks again for listening. Bye now.